What's going on, everyone? Trust the Buzz here. If you are new to the channel, just know I make daily Charlotte Hornets content. So if that interests you, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. In today's video, I am going to be showing you part of a discussion I had with my guy Evan from the Bring This Thing podcast. I was lucky enough to be brought on as a guest, and we just talked about what a trade package will look like for Donovan Mitchell. Do we want Donovan Mitchell? And like I said, if so, what is the package looking like? And we talked about other things, Charlotte Hornets as well. So this is just a snippet. Make sure you go ahead and hit the links down below to go listen to the full podcast, run his numbers up. That's why I'm only putting a snippet just so you can get a feel for it and see if you like it. Whole episode is like 45 minutes or 50 minutes, something like that. So this is only going to be like 15, but make sure you go ahead and check his stuff out. Evan's a cool guy, great host, and I thoroughly enjoy being on the podcast with him. So make sure you just go ahead and hit those links down below.
And really excited to talk about these Donovan Mitchell rumors. Man, I feel like that's been the talk of the town the past week. You know, it's been an eventful off season, some good news, mostly bad news. But Donovan Mitchell, I mean, it's definitely interesting, if nothing else. Before we really talk about, mock trades or anything, what was kind of your reaction like when you saw that the Hornets are I guess, a rumored destination for him?
I was surprised, just because I feel like there are a lot of times the Hornets are forgotten about. Just because no matter who's on the team, I mean, we can even go even pre LaMelo time. I feel like the Hornets just were forgotten about. But as you know, Hornets fans, we know that we have a lot of young talent. It may not be fully developed talent, but we have a lot of young players who can play when given the opportunity. So when I saw that the Hornets were, in the run for Donovan Mitchell, I was surprised because it's Hornets at the end of the day, but I wasn't surprised when I really got to think about it, just because I get it why somebody would want a lot of the guys we have, even though a lot of them may not have even played that much. And mainly I'm talking about like someone like James Bouknight or Kai Jones. But I mean, we all know what they're capable of, so Danny Ainge to me is a good evaluator of talent. So I'm just, he's the type of guy where I wouldn't be surprised that he, has just noticed those guys. I'm not going to say he watched those guys closely, but he just noticed them and probably kept like a mental note.
Yeah, like it's interesting you mentioned Danny Ainge. On the one hand, Donovan Mitchell's an awesome player, of course. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty clear. And so he would be the best player in the deal, right? Like
Right.
you're not sending anything back to Utah where they're getting a better player.
Mm-hmm.
So I just like part of me though is so nervous about it because Danny Ainge has this history of just pulling off these trades that are like just enormous hauls for guys. Like he if you remember the Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett trade, he sent him to Brooklyn, gets the picks that turn into Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Even earlier this summer, the Rudy Gobert trade, and getting a bunch of picks off of Minnesota for Rudy Gobert. So it's gonna take a lot. Like this isn't Danny Ainge isn't stupid. Like he's not
Right.
gonna take a deal that's not, you know, like the best deal possible that he can
Mm-hmm.
get. But that said, Charlotte, you just think about the young guys on the team. It's very interesting to me because like the potential is still there for these guys. Like Kai Jones, James Bouknight, JT Thor. Like I don't even feel like they've really scratched the surface of what they could be.
Right.
A guy like PJ Washington, I feel like would almost have to be in the trade, because I think Utah would really value him.
Yeah.
He's further along in his development than those guys, but I mean, I still think PJ could continue to get better as a player. I mean, this will
Mm-hmm.
be his fourth year, so it's not like he's at his peak yet,
Mm-hmm.
as a player. So at the end of the day, like there are attractive pieces on the roster, and then from like a salary
Right.
point of view, you probably have to include at least Hayward and or Terry Rozier,
Mm-hmm.
which is that's kind of what I've kept coming back to,
Mm-hmm.
where I think if you're Charlotte, it's tough. Like you probably, from availability standpoint, you'd
Mm-hmm.
probably rather include Hayward, but from
Yeah, for
a
sure.
roster, like the way the roster is built,
Mm-hmm.
you'd probably rather include Rozier because I don't know like Donovan Mitchell is a better version of Terry
For
Rozier. So
sure. And a lot of
Rozier
people
just becomes a
forget
very
that.
expensive bench player at that point. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that well, one, well, I just want to go back to what you said about PJ. It's interesting what you say about PJ because kind of like I was watching PJ, since he's been drafted, his role has changed every single season. If you go back to like just when he was drafted, they ask him to play the five, they ask him to play the four, and then like the way he plays the four has changed. He really has thrived in every role they've asked him to play, but he has yet to play like I feel like you said, to scratch the surface because he has yet to really play the same role in consecutive years. So like even going into this next season, if we keep him, Miles more than likely won't be there. You're asking him to do something completely different. It's not I'm going to stand in the corner, shoot threes, or LaMelo drives, kicks it out to him. You're going to ask him to not handle the ball the way Miles did, but you're going to ask him to, kind of be a little more assertive, which we've seen that he can do in limited time, but he can do it. And so then going back to, so he would definitely be in a trade. And then going to what you said about between Gordon and Terry, for Utah, I think you would want Gordon, not because you're trying to use Gordon, but simply because of the fact that he has 2 years left, while Terry, I think, still has a four. So it's just not going, it just wouldn't make sense for them to get Terry. Now, Danny Ainge, like you said, is not stupid. So I wouldn't be surprised if Danny Ainge wants Terry, but is able to turn Terry into two other young guys, trade Terry to, I don't think this trade will happen, but let's say the Lakers or something, and then to pull like, THT, Talon Horn Tucker, and then a first, you know what I mean? So I just wouldn't be surprised if he were to do that with Terry. But you would think they would want Gordon not to actually play Gordon, but just because he has the less amount of time on his deal. But you never know, like, especially with Danny Ainge, for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Terry, it's 4 years left on the deal, as opposed to Gordon, with the 2 years left. Obviously, he's already played in Utah before. At this point, like, I feel like the thing with him, it's always if he can stay healthy. Like, he's
Right.
still a good player. He's not
For
bad
sure.
at
For sure.
basketball. And I think Utah, like the All-Star games there this year, they got to have something to give the fans. Like, you can't just have a G League squad out there
Right.
for the fans. So like Gobert's already gone. If Mitchell ends up being traded, Hayward, like he's not on the level of Mitchell, but you can sell him
Mhm.
to the fans. Like I'm sure the fans still have some level of respect for
Mhm.
him, given that he was already there. Like Mike Conley, I know he's kind of like
Mhm.
an almost star, but he's older now. He's not
Right.
really a guy who's going to be like a marquee kind of a name,
Mhm.
So interesting to see. We'll see. Yeah, man, you mentioned PJ like never having really played the same role in consecutive years. That is such a good point. I remember sitting here almost a year ago, one of the very first episodes of my show talking
Mhm.
about, I did a position unit preview like series. So it
Mhm.
was like 1 through 5, so 5 episodes, and talking about the four spot. And I was saying, like, it was up in the air. Like, I didn't even know who was going to start,
Right.
PJ or Miles. And now looking back, like Miles had his breakout season last year. PJ, I think, had a good year.
Mhm.
Like he might tell you differently. People also forget he was hurt in the early part of the season, so he missed
Mhm.
some games early on. Not that there's ever a good time to miss games, but
Mhm.
especially early when the team is gelling, chemistry is being formed,
Right.
because then you're kind of coming back in and almost like, I don't want to say like disrupting the chemistry, but
Mhm.
you're having to fit back in, right? It's interesting. I pulled it up on my Twitter last year. There's the game. It was against the Hawks. It was on a Wednesday night
Mhm.
in Charlotte, and it was on March 16th. It was a Wednesday night in Charlotte. They played
Mhm.
the Hawks. Before that game, so beginning of the year up through March 16th, PJ had
Right.
put up a stat line: 9.8 points, 45% from the field, 36.4% from deep, and 71% from the foul line. Okay, so like okay numbers, like nothing to
Right.
really write home about. From that game on, because that was the game, if you remember, it was kind of tight down the stretch, and PJ
Mhm.
scored like 13 points in a row, and Charlotte ended up winning.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
in the fourth quarter, like in the last like 3 minutes, he just went nuclear.
Mhm.
From that game on, 11.6 points a night, 54.4% from the floor. So almost 10 percentage points higher from the floor, 37.5% from deep, and 75% from the foul line. So his points went up by almost 2 points a game, and all of his shooting percentages went up across the board. like from March 16th through the end of the year. So
Mhm.
I just keep coming back to that as like, was that almost like a sign of things to come this year?
Mhm.
But again, it's like I know fans want to keep PJ. Heck, I would love to get Donovan Mitchell and keep PJ Washington. I
Right.
would. But there's like no way that could happen, right? So at some point
Mhm.
you have to give up something valuable in return. Like that's why it's called a trade. You gotta like send
Yeah.
something back. Kind of what are your thoughts on that? Like what's the most you would be comfortable with Charlotte giving up in any deal?
Like you said, I wish we could keep PJ, but PJ would have to. He just simply would have to go, just because of he is out of the like. Let's for example, we talked about how Terry and Gordon are have to be for salary purposes in the trade. Well, when you go to the next level of the young guys, PJ, like you mentioned earlier, is the most developed out of them, and he still has another stretch. Like all the stats you brought up, you know, a lot of people, if you don't watch the Hornets, you're like, oh, that's okay. But when you think about how often does PJ even get the ball, 11 points, shooting 50%, that's impressive. Shooting 30, basically 37% from three. That's very impressive when you consider he rarely gets the ball. And if he does, it's like a quick screen or dribble handoff to like LaMelo, Terry, whoever's the ball handler at the time. So those are impressive numbers. And we haven't even talked about his defense, where sometimes PJ looks like the best defender on the court. Like he like there I know there was a trending video. I guess for Hornets it was trending, at least Hornets fans, but where he was like on Trae Young, and I think this time they were in Atlanta, and he guarded Trae Young, and I think Clint Capella and Oyeka and Okwangwu all in the same possession, and he just seamlessly. So we're not even talking about his offense. His defense is just good enough, and it obviously is going to get better. But yeah, he definitely would have to be in there. James Booknight is interesting. So court wise, if you look at like the Kings game where he went nuclear, he just went crazy. If you look at that, you're like, oh, there's some talent there. But then you can also look at like how he got into James Borrego, how he seemed checked out at times when he wasn't playing. And I kind of sympathize with him. I didn't sympathize with him when he was getting in it with James Borrego, but I kind of sympathize with him because there was a lot of times where the offense looked really stagnant and they would still have like Jalen McDaniels out there. And I love Jalen McDaniels, but it's just like if we're already down 20, in the beginning of the fourth quarter, why not throw in James Booknight, let him put up a couple of shots, not detrimental to the team, but at least maybe could get something going while, you have Miles or LaMelo on the bench or whatever the case may be. So I get his frustration, but if you're looking at that, you can be like, I don't know if I really want him. And that's, to me, James Booknight is going to be a vital part because it just depends on how Danny Ainge values him. If he looks at on the court stuff in the big when James Booknight played like 20 minutes, he always scored double digit points. So if you're Danny Ainge and you look at that and that's what you value, then you're like, oh, okay. But if you really look at the off the court stuff and you're like, I don't know, then I feel like the Hornets, you really don't have much else to offer. Because like I said, you do PJ, but let's say you don't put in James Booknight. So then you really have what you can offer JT Thor, Kai Jones. And then I don't know and then at that point, I just don't know if it becomes enough anymore. With the Hornets, they're in an interesting situation because I think they can only give up 3 picks, like future first picks. So you're going to rely a lot on talent you already have on the roster, unlike uh, the Timberwolves, who were able to offer like 4, maybe 5 picks, and then 2 guys who were drafted in the first round.
It was a
So
lot. Yeah, it was like I
yeah,
think I want to say it was 5 picks. And the guy, the Kessler kid who they just got from
Walker Kessler,
Auburn.
yeah.
Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
like so base. I mean, if you want to count that as a first round pick,
Right. And
because
then their first round pick from last year, I forgot his name, but he was also included in that. So it just depends on how you look at it. But for the Hornets, we are not going to be able to rely on like the picks. It's going to be more about who we have. So I think it comes down to how Danny Ainge values James Booknight. And if James Booknight somehow is not in that trade, but we can give up Kai Jones and JT Thor, I think that would be huge for the Hornets to be able to keep him. Um, but it just depends. I don't want to give up too much, but also I'm in this weird phase where I don't know if I want the Hornets to just go for it because, like, as long as I've been a fan, we've been either in the middle or at the bottom. There's been no, so I don't know if I just want them to go for it just for my sake of just like, all right, well, at least I know they're wanting to win. Because sometimes I question, like, do these guys really want to win, or do they have a certain way how they envisioned winning? So I kind of wanted to go for it, but then part of me is like, if Miles isn't is not if Miles is unable to come back, which, like I said, I highly doubt. Do you just start over and not start over because you have LaMelo? LaMelo's not going to let the team be horrible, like, but just by himself, whoever's around him. But at the same time, if you start over, you go into this part where it's like, okay, we can retool for a better future. Because if we don't get Donovan Mitchell, the future is kind of capped out right now with the current roster. And you have like Kai Jones, James Bouknight, but right now we don't have much to base that off of. So I feel like I know a lot of Hornets fans don't want to trade too much to get Donovan Mitchell, but if you want something to change, you have to be okay with another rebuild or risking it all for Donovan Mitchell. I really feel like there's not an in between with this team. So the asking price is going to be a lot, but if we want to win, at least, I mean, if you want to sacrifice the future, then you got to do it. Like, you almost have to do what about just about anything Danny Ainge wants, which that's what he's very good at, is making the other team feel like I have to do this trade or else my fan base will hate me forever. So
Yeah, it's just so many good points, man. Danny Ainge, like, I don't know if a whole lot of people know this. I don't think I've ever mentioned it on the show or admitted it, if you want to call it that, an admission of fandom. But really, the first like big time trade I remember in the NBA was that summer where he got Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett to the Celtics. He got Ray Allen from Seattle, got KG from Minnesota. That was really the first, and that was before Twitter. And I mean, I was a little kid, so I
yeah,
didn't have
right.
access. I wasn't keeping up with rumors and stuff.
Mm.
I just remember seeing it in the paper. Like, you still got like the actual like hard copy paper. Like, and
Yeah.
I would go read the sports section every day, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like, Celtics add KG, and I liked that team because I'm from South Carolina. Ray
Mm-hmm.
Allen and Kevin Garnett are also from South Carolina, so I
Mm-hmm.
pulled for them, which was the reason I liked them. But that was my introduction to Trader Danny, as people call him,
Right.
and it's just like one of those guys. It's like, man, if he is doing business with you, is this a mistake?
All right, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, make sure you go ahead and hit the links down below to go support the podcast. Like I said, Evan's a cool guy. It was great talking, Hornets basketball with him, and there's nothing else to talk about. You know what I mean? So it was fun just to talk about potential trade packages for Donovan Mitchell. Whether you want Donovan Mitchell or don't want Donovan Mitchell, it's cool to just to see trade packages, especially when nothing else going on. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to actually go listen to the full podcast using the links down below, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.